Hi everyone, Husky here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to convert any of your Roblox builds into meshes. This allows you to import your builds into Blender, but also it optimizes your builds. Like if you're doing a complex build, something like a gun or something, it allows you to do like all kinds of unions and such to your parts, and you can export those as a mesh and then import them back in as a mesh, so it's one whole mesh. That reduces your part count, but also reduces the unions into a mesh, because a mesh, one mesh versus like 10 unions or 20 unions or however many, is a lot better than having the unions, because the unions, the way they are right now, very well optimized for use. And if you do a union that is too complex, it causes a lot of frame rate issues to your game. So it's pretty straightforward, and I'm just going to take something that I've already built. So this is a part of a wall right here that I've built. Okay, so I'm going to use something that I've already built as an example. So basically, what you need to do is separate each color from each other, because if you don't, whenever you import it, or no, export it, then import it, you're going to have one mesh and it's going to be all one color, unless you were to go into Blender and make a texture, which is going to be more complicated than it's worth, whenever you could just separate each color into its own mesh. So what you would do is you'd take Part Picker. I'll have the link down in the description below, but you click this part button here and it'll show you what part you're hovering over in the little UI there, and click the color you want to have selected, and make sure that color is selected right here. It's going to be highlighted in blue. That means you have it selected by that. And if you need to select by material as well, remember you can only have one material as well. So if you wanted to do a material and color, you just click that and it will select everything by that color and that material. So now we just run filter, and then if you move it to the side here, you have all the parts that are this color here, and you can right click. Actually, what I like to do is I like to union it as much as I can. That way it's like, I've noticed if there's too many parts too, whenever you're trying to export it, it can kind of like mess the mesh up. But also, like, some things still do Z fight if you don't union them. If you union them and then you export it and then re-import it, it won't do the Z fighting either. So um this right here is like already a union for me, so I'm not going to mess with that. But the rest of this, I'm gonna select it and then, no, not group it, union it, and then make sure to take a look at it, make sure everything looks fine, nothing's warped or anything like that. If it's warped, then you have too many uh small parts and such, and you need to reduce it down to smaller unions. So now it's just a total of like, okay, so now this is a total of just 3 unions, and that's a good thing. That makes it a little bit more simple whenever we're exporting it. All you gotta do is right click your selection, export selection, and then save it to like in your documents. I usually save it in the documents, it's easier to find there. And I've also noticed naming can kind of be important with this, because if you have like something that starts the same, sometimes it won't properly export or import. So I typically just name things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 because if I've noticed if I do it like that, um it doesn't usually conflict. So if you have like issues with importing and exporting, I would recommend try changing the name of your mesh, and it'll probably it's more of an import issue. It's not really an export, but if you have any issues with it, change the name and try changing the name several different times. And if it still won't import, then try resaving it as a different name and then importing it. Sometimes it's just a little bit of finicking. I don't know why that is, but that's how it can be sometimes. So then we just save it. Now if we go to like Blender here, we can just go to File, import wavefront object, and then you just type 1.obj, import object, and it's not going to spawn at the origin because we didn't have the wall at the origin. It's going to spawn it over to the side. And it looks kind of weird here because of the lighting, I think. But, yeah, you can see everything's here. Nothing's really damaged, just the lighting's a bit weird here. And you could modify it some in Blender, but I wouldn't recommend because the builds you do in Roblox are what you would call, I guess, low poly, where you have a low amount of faces. And let's say I wanted to have this UV sphere right here, and let's say I wanted to. So you would just basically up the segments, up everything, and then it's smooth as can be. Okay, so now you like have everything turned up and hit tab, and look at all these little faces right here. Right, there's so many little faces on here. And then let's say we go over here, take this to the edit tab, and look at how many faces are here. It's a lot less. So let's say I took this sphere and tried to import it. It might say too many triangles. And let's see. Export wavefront object. You can also import any Blender build as long as it's within a reasonable amount of triangles. You just have to export as a wavefront object, and I'm gonna name this just a sphere. And to import something back in, we would go to Home tab. Actually, no, Model tab was correct. And then Insert Object. And then you click Mesh Part. If you don't see it, just type it here. And then you'll have to double click it. And you should get this checkered block right here. So you see this little folder to the right over here where it says Mesh ID. You click the folder. And then you go to your documents. And then we're going to start the sphere. Yeah, so the sphere, it says right here, your mesh has too many triangles. Limit is 10,000. Your mesh has over 200,000. So, sphere is what they call high poly, which means you have a lot of faces, a lot of triangles, and Roblox doesn't really support high poly meshes. And so, whenever you're building stuff in or not really building, but modeling stuff in Blender, you'd make a low poly creation. So you would want to make something really simple in Blender, but that's a topic for another time. So now we open the folder and we're just going to click 1. We're going to open that up. And it'll say, the mesh you are importing is very large. Would you like to resize the mesh? Say no, otherwise it's going to make it small. It just shrinks the size. So if you want to keep the original size, keep it no. Your mesh contains location data. Would you like to move your mesh given the location? This just basically means your mesh is going to move to the opposite of like let's say like this wall right here is where I've like exported it from. So if I import it and I click yes, it'll just move it to the opposite of this wall's location right here, because that is where its location was. And I didn't move the location in Blender. But if you want to keep it where this part is, just click no. If you want to move it to the opposite of this, click yes. Or just, I'm going to click no. And it looks like another dialogue showed up, but it's fine. So as you can see, you check out the wall. There shouldn't be any kind of weird misshapings happening to it. It should look as how you had it built. And if there is any misshapings, you need to adjust your unions or make it a smaller, less parts in the mesh. Now we can just easily go over here and grab our color, which is 80 by 80 by 80. So I'll just type that in, 80 by 80 by 80. Like, oh, miss a 0. And then you just add the shadows on, and then you can change the texture. Like if you want a diamond plate, you can change it to that. I'm just gonna put mine on smooth plastic, and then we can look in here, and nothing appears to be fighting or glitching, and that is a good thing. That's what you want. You don't want any kind of glitching going on, because that affects your FPS. What I mean by glitching. So what I mean by glitching is, like, let's take this part, and then take another part, and then let's put these together like this. Okay, so I'm going to change the color of this so that this is like more visible. And for those with epilepsy, this might be a caution for you guys, because this does flash two different colors back and forth. So if you have epilepsy, I'd skip this part. Anyway, so as you can see, this is like glitching the surfaces, and this is really bad for your FPS right here when you're building a game. If you have something doing this a lot, you could just like go and union it, but as I said before, if you do unions like that, this does make it into one whole part. But if you have complex unions, this is a simple union, so this would be fine. But if you have a complex union that can affect your FPS as well, and not only that, but too many unions can also affect your FPS. Not to mention that as unions currently stand, they sometimes do not fully load in ever for a player. So, like, let's say you built this nice wall and most of it is like unioned. Sometimes that those unions don't load and there's just pieces missing. And that's why I prefer to use this method of just like exporting parts as a mesh and then re-importing them as a mesh, so that they become one whole piece that I can work with. And so I can just like snap this corner to the original here, and then I can move it to the side. And then I'm going to quickly do the same thing I did to that piece of the wall to the rest of this, so I'll get back to you. Okay, so I have these all separated out by their individual color group. And there's just a standalone piece of glass. I'm not going to export that because that's just completely pointless. But, and that's another thing. With certain materials like glass, and neon, if you have like a bunch of neon, you could also do this method and just have like one part, quotation, one part, be a neon part, instead of having 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pieces of neon or glass taking up all of the game's like performance. So to keep your details and also optimize it, you'd just do that. You would take the group of neon and you'd export it, import it, and it's just one part that's made neon. And that will help your game a lot better than having like 50 pieces of neon. From my testing, that's what I've learned. And so now I'm going to just copy this actually. You don't have to copy this, but I'm going to copy the original mesh part. I'm just going to go ahead and follow through with like the rest. Okay, so now that they're all imported as meshes, I'm going to just go ahead and set the colors. So, and then I'm just going to snap these with their originals, and just gonna select this and then deselect the mesh part. You could also just move to the side, but I'm just doing this because it's a little bit easier doing that, just depending on how many parts you have. And then you'll have like some parts that are a little bit harder to like snap into place. And by the way, when you use After Effects, and if you don't know how to use the snapping feature, I have a video, I'll link that down in the description as well, that explains how to use After Effects. So if you look at the hitboxes of these, which the hitbox is where it shows where these like blue lines are. If you notice, if I go to like here, there's nothing that is lined up to a corner that I can easily grab or a center. So what I usually do is I pick a part and I'm going to snap this to the corner of the hitbox because the After Effects snaps the hitbox. And I'm going to scale it. It'll let me. There we go. And then we're just going to fill up this space, basically, with this part. And that fills up the border, or the hitbox, rather. And that gives us, like, an edge for us to select on whenever we're moving this. So we're going to bring this and bring it to the corner, because the hitboxes should be pretty much the exact same. And we're going to bring that over. And that makes it easier to line it up. And we're going to delete the union, and it should be just the mesh part left. And then I'm just going to move this back into place. There we go. Now it's in place. Sometimes you'll have to like shift it around a little bit more. But if you do everything correctly, it'll keep everything in the exact place that it should be. Just gonna bring this. Do the same thing as everything else. Alright. And now the wall is all together. Just make sure that everything is lined up correctly. And then if you select it, this is 5 pieces. Actually, it's 6. I didn't move the glass in, my bad. Move the glass back in. So now I select it, 6 whole items. And now let me bring in the original back in. If we compare the two, this is originally 136 parts. Actually, it's even more than that, but these are unioned right here. So if this wasn't union, this would be even more, but 136 parts versus 6. And it's even bigger of a difference when you're making a gun. Like, let me show you. So, this gun right here. I don't. This isn't the original, but this right here is completely made out of mesh parts. If you see right here, mesh part, mesh part, mesh part, and then there is some just like loose parts, but that's just like the little like singular parts here, just one single part. So I didn't bother making those into a mesh, but this right here would originally be, actually let me see if it's original. I'll get back to you. Okay, so this is the original right here. Obviously it's massive because I shrink it down, but and it's a lot harder to build. It's small. But if I were to ungroup this, which I'm going to ungroup this. Okay. So this does already have some mesh parts into it, but already you can see 1,203 parts. This is what this is. And this is actually even more than that if you count the unions, the mesh parts that are already in here. And then the final product, if you look, there's only 34 parts. And I could technically, in theory, make this even less, but that would sacrifice color and such. But let's say I use this gun right here as just as it is as the model. This would cause a lot of lag, especially with multiple people running around carrying these things. Each player in the game is going to be holding 1,200 parts in their hand, of parts that are unanchored, mind you. Unanchored parts are a lot more laggy than a part that is anchored because it's moving around and stuff. If you were to put like 10 unanchored parts versus 10 anchored parts and did like a FPS check, what I mean by that is you'd get an FPS unlocker and see the difference in your FPS. You'll notice there's a difference. Or you could just make a bunch of them, depending on your computer. You'll see the difference. And also, having 1,200 parts, it in each player's hand. Let's say you have 10 people in the game. That's 12,000. And 12,000 right there is going to just be really, really, really laggy of unanchored parts, because you cannot have this gun anchored. If you have it anchored, the player is just going to fall over and just be stuck in place. Just a word of advice for you guys that are like making guns and such like this. Highly recommend doing this because it will help your game's performance a lot better. And I will do a video here in the future on how to optimize your game. And I hope this video helped you guys. So if you like this video and it's helped you, please subscribe, because I'll be doing more of these videos in the future.